Hello, from my house to yours. Welcome to EMS at Sea Level. Currently, we're talking to people about the trends they're seeing for 2023, and I'm delighted to be here with Dr. Bill Cardoso, founder of Creative Electron. Bill, always a pleasure to chat with you, always different points of view on what's going on in the industry. As you wrap up 2022 with all its challenges and you look forward to 2023, what are you seeing?
Well, I'm not sure I look forward to 2023, but and I say that because 2022 was a year of, challenges. Of course, we're still struggling with supply chain issues, but 2022 was a pivotal year when the U.S. economy and some of the worldwide economies started to put the brakes on inflation, right? And with that, we've seen capital that was, widely available before started to dry up. And as capital dries up, as interest rates rise, as the access to financing for people starts to get harder and harder. What I see in 2023 is that it's going to be a challenging year. It's going to be, as usual, we're excited with opportunities and the new industries are working with, but it's going to be very. I'm very careful, right, and very curious to identify and to look for overcapacity issues in our supply chain and in our customers. And what do I mean by that? We've had, and I'm sure you had that experience as well, where you have suppliers who had long lead times, right? 5, 6, 7-month lead times. And all of a sudden they call you and say, hey, do you remember that order you put 3 months ago? It's ready now, right? And we've seen that, right? And of course, the most famous episode of overcapacity that we all know is Peloton, right? They built this $500 million facility, or started to build, and then ran out of demand, right? And as a result, the stock plummets, CEO gets fired, and everything that comes with that. So and then we look internally, right? We look at ourselves and say, are we overstaffed? Are our customers all of a sudden going to disappear? Or some of them who are making plans to expand will change those plans. So it's unlike every other economic upturn and downturn we've seen before, right? We've gone through the 2008 recession and depression, and this feels very different because it was a somewhat artificial one, right? With COVID created all these unexpected unintended consequences that we're seeing now. And for those people who think that the pandemic is over, I mean, we're going to be feeling the impact of the pandemic for, I don't know, 10 years or so.
Absolutely. We're seeing huge impacts in China in particular at the moment from the pandemic. And anybody that thought the pandemic was over, as if they're watching the news, is certainly aware that it's not. It's interesting what you say about this curiosity and this caution that you're seeing in the market. And I think it's been fascinating to talk to people over recent months, particularly the EMS CEOs themselves, who were expecting to see a softening in demand, or almost waiting to see a softening in demand, and haven't seen that unless they are companies that are heavily in China or are heavily dependent on the consumer markets. And they talk about this balance of increased technology in products that's kind of helping mitigate that threat. Do you see that? Do you see the fact that there's more electronics in cars, more electronics in the medical industry, a rise in mil-aero? Do you see that as a bit of a mitigation to any downturn we would see as a normal trend?
So I don't know if this mitigation is real. That's my concern, right? What I
Mitigation
do
or
know,
optimism, eh?
yeah, because if you think about it, right, a lot of people see, a lot of companies saw these long lead times and they just started buying, right, and placing orders and placing POs just because lead time was so long. Less they're buying and piling up POs for where we think it's going to happen, right? So you look back, how many of those POs, how much of their forecast is actually real?
Yeah.
Right? I don't know.
Yeah.
Right? It's just
And
people
that forecast has
foreseeing.
become POs for the first time. Someone said, one EMS said to me last week, we didn't believe forecasts when they were just forecasts. Now people are writing them on purchase orders. We suddenly believe them. They're the same. They're still estimates or guesstimates at best from sales and marketing teams.
Exactly, because a PO became basically a way to
Became necessary.
Yeah, it's basically a way to set your place in line, right? You set the time where you put yourself in line to get something that's going to show up in 6 months. As things become more and more available, how many of those POs are going to still there? So that's what I don't know. I think it's going to 2023 is going to be the beginning of that unraveling, right? We're actually going to see. I feel like we're not in firm ground yet, right? We're still soft. We're still, aquaplaning from 2020, 2021 with all this trillions of dollars thrown into the market, people buying, people not traveling, people staying home with a lot of disposable income available. And now things are starting to harden up, and I don't know if things are going to land. I really don't, right? So we're being very careful. We are, we're busy, right? At Creative Electron, we're close to 100 people now, and we're hiring, but very cautiously, right? Because it's one of those situations where, I don't know if the floor is going to disappear from us tomorrow, right?
Yeah. It's curious, isn't it? That inventory overhang is a really big deal. And we're at the end of a very complex bullwhip effect. We don't know where that's going to settle now. So I think it's going to be fascinating in 2023 to see that. We're unraveling component shortages. So like you say, your 7-month lead time is suddenly available tomorrow, but that might not be enough parts to finish that particular product because there's a shortage elsewhere. So there's a lack of clarity there. So there's a whole bunch of variables in the market. And on top of that, we're seeing a bit of a reshoring or friendshoring trend where people are reducing their dependence on certain geographies. Do you see that as being beneficial to the US? And do you see things like the CHIPS Act and what they're doing in printed circuit boards as something that can help bring industry back, or is that just a very big ship to turn around?
Well, all the above, right? The reshoring is something that realistically started before COVID, right? There were some policies in the US that kind of, nudged companies to come back to the US, or or go to Mexico, right? That's realistically that they come back to North America, not necessarily to the United States. But I don't know, Phil, I'm not a big believer that big government can make changes like this in the economy as far as the supply chain. So I'm still, skeptical about that. I'm more of like, I'm going to wait and see what actually happens. It is a massive, a ship to turn. So I'm skeptical about that one. And because one of the issues with this, the bullwhip you refer to, is that it's happening for some companies, not others, right? And then for companies, if you are a supplier, right, or the challenge becomes cash flow, right? And that's something that everyone has to be extremely careful in 2023, is if you have suppliers who are now pushing down product down your throat that you have to take, and you can't finish, like, for example, if you get one piece of the machine, but I can't, collect the price of the machine because the whole thing is not built, I can't pay that supplier, even though now it's available, right? So cash flow becomes a massive, you got to be very careful cash flow so you don't end up underwater very quick. And the other thing that's fascinating to me is the labor market, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. We talk about component shortages, but the talent shortages have been there constantly in the background, and it's the first time we've had an economic downturn like this with such a short supply of labor. How do you see that changing? Obviously, Twitter are letting people go, but they're not people that are going to assemble machines for you in Southern California, I guess.
Yeah, so we have. So I was reading. It was what was it? I think Wall Street Journal had last week, right? An overview of layoffs of tech companies, and from that report, we've already surpassed the dot-com boom as far as layoffs in the high-skilled workers, right? And so I think they had 175,000 people of these high-tech workers that were laid off. That is Tesla, SpaceX, Twitter, all the Elon Musk companies, and Facebook, and Microsoft, Amazon, pretty much everyone. And it's somewhat expected, right? I mean, they staffed up to keep up with demand from everyone being home, buying stuff from home, and now they have to trim down. I mean, and then you have on top of that pressure on advertising online, right? That's just plummeting, and it's affecting Facebook and everybody else. But anyway, so what we see is, just like you mentioned, this lopsided downturn in labor shortage, right? Where in the past we would see even in the recovery stage of a downturn, availability of the technician level, the assembler level, and the high skilled worker was harder to find. Now it's exactly the opposite, right? I mean, we all go to restaurants nowadays, and they don't have waiting staff, right? They don't have signs, we're short staffed, please be patient. I mean, now they're still doing that. And so with that, it is, and I think a lot of the over the pandemic ignited the gig economy to a level where people are making financial trade-offs that make sense to them and for their families, right?
Yeah.
Are you going to spend 8 hours a day, or you can make too much money delivering food or work on Amazon or somewhere else, right?
Yeah. I think that's had a big impact, and it's fascinating to see somewhere like San Francisco where there are huge numbers of software engineers available, but there's nobody available to make your coffee or wait tables at the restaurant. So it is this upside down economy. Yeah. What about technology trends? Do you see this as a opportunity to push digital transformation even harder, or do you see it as something that's maybe going to put the brakes on some plans because of the cost of capital?
I think it's hard to set a trend because we kind of see both, right? We have companies that are with the increased cost of money are getting more cautious as far as making investments, right? And then you have companies who are strapped, and that's mostly geographical, right? California companies, for example, are having trouble finding people, so they're more interested in that digital transformation conversation, the automation, and the possibility of automating out the operator from the equation. And then you have different industries. The defense sector is doing really well in the US right now, as you can expect, and they don't have the labor issue for the most part. They don't have the capital issue, right? So then penetrating digital transformation, those industries is a bit harder. So since we serve a broad range of verticals, we get to experience a lot of this dichotomies in the market. The pros and cons, the digital transformation. In the EMS sector, in US, there's more of an appetite for digital transformation, right? And and you have customers in Mexico. And when I talk about automation, is the substitution for labor, right? That's what I'm directly referring to, is the ability to have somebody who's going to be working in front of a machine making pass-fail decisions, and at the lowest level, right? And then if you think about a higher level, as far as the digital industry 4.0 and things like that.
Yeah, the whole ecosystem.
I don't know. We talk about it all the time. I don't know.
Well, that's exactly the case, Bill. And you know, I do this thing every now and again when I'm going to interview someone. I look back at the first time I interviewed them 7, 8, 10 years ago, and realized we were talking about the same topics. We were talking about transformation. We were talking about changes. I think what does play in your favor is inspection, and the data that you get from inspection has become so fundamental to how people do things. There's almost zero trust in the supply chain, and as a result of that, people want inspection at goods inward as well as on the line and as well as at end of line. So there are continued opportunities there. So I think it's interesting. I think it's going to be one of those years where, rather than talk every 6 months, we're going to end up having to talk every month to try and figure out what's going on. Because I think, particularly in Q1, it's going to move pretty quick. So,
and we can't be afraid to revisit our business models, right? That's another thing that we've been thinking about. It's the good old. It's worked so far, so why change? You can change really fast nowadays.
Yeah. I think agility is going to be important, and as you say, cash is king. You don't have agility if you haven't got the cash to make that move. Bill, pleasure to chat to you as always. Look forward to catching up with you at Apex in San Diego. First time back there since 2020 for me, so that's gonna be fun. But in the meantime, thanks so much for your time.
I look forward to seeing you here in San Diego.